The new blood pressure recommendations from authorities, which are becoming ever more aggressive, some may say reckless. We are going to talk as three doctors about our concerns. To be honest, I have many concerns. Concerns that almost make me lose sleep when I think about the consequences potentially for some patients of these aggressive blood pressure recommendations. For anybody who does enjoy our discussions, please check in the links down below for our separate, unique channel, Doctors of Ojais, where we post a lot of separate, exclusive discussions all related to your health and well-being. Let's start off with our cardiologist here, Dr. Peter. What has happened? I've talked about it a little bit in some other videos, but these new recommendations, let's talk about how aggressive they are now.
Of course, we've seen this with a lot of different other parameters that we measure. We've seen it with blood sugars. We've seen it with cholesterol. And now we're seeing it with blood pressure. Every year, every decade, they get stricter. We create a whole new wave of instant patients, right? So people who are normally healthy, who had good blood pressure, are now considered to be hypertensive. So the new guidelines really took it up a notch and made it a lot stricter in a number of ways, but specifically in saying that if your blood pressure is above 120/80, you now have high blood pressure.
Which is incredible. So these are the guidelines from the American Heart Association and American College of Cardiology. And we'll include a link down below for anybody who wants to see these guidelines. So basically, classifying now somebody whose systolic blood pressure is, say, 125, this is the top number, as being elevated. Dr. Ben, your thoughts on this?
Well, it's certainly, it's interesting because when you look at the guidelines, they do say, there's a portion of it that talks about treating the patient and not the number. My problem is when you come up with guidelines like this and you're a major society that produces that kind of data that is in front of all physicians that read it across the country, that quickly becomes almost mandatory, right? So physicians are going to strive to get patients to those numbers. And sometimes at their peril. Overtreating blood pressure can be very disastrous. It can cause falls. It can cause dizziness. It can cause confusion. Almost all, if not all, of the blood pressure medications have significant side effects. They don't just have to do with dizziness and confusion and falls, but other things as well. So it is a concern if we're going to be much more aggressive with these medications. And again, if this is going to be a guideline that has stricter control of blood pressure, the next step is you're going to prescribe more medications. So yeah, it's a significant concern to me. And I have one question as well. If we're getting stricter and stricter with blood pressure control, and we're getting stricter and stricter with cholesterol control, why is everybody getting sicker?
That's a great question. And that relates to our whole paradigm right now. And there was a time many years ago where a systolic blood pressure, the top number of 140, was considered normal, especially as anybody gets older. And two things to emphasize here. We're going to have this discussion because we're speaking from the heart as doctors who want the best for you. And we see disastrous things all the time from overtreatment. Never change any medication yourself. And conversely, we're going to be totally honest, you don't want the blood pressure to be too high. That can also be disastrous. But this is the whole problem with the modern day paradigm, is the pendulum swings too far in the other direction. Let's think here logically. You have somebody, let's say, who's over the age of 65 years old, and their systolic blood pressure top number is in the, say, high 120s. And there may now well be doctors out there who are thinking we should get that under 120. Let's really talk here because this is so important. So many people could get hurt here. What sort of issues could we see, especially at the older ages?
Oh, there's a ton of different issues. It's almost like we're taking the normal physiology of aging and now labeling it as a disease. So we know people, as you get older, your blood pressure goes up, but it just opens up a whole slew of problems, Ben. And so really, what I foresee is that doctors are going to jump right to medications. All right. We said before that healthcare systems get monitored by, what their blood pressures are. There's a lot of different parameters that physicians are reviewed on. And so physicians are going to jump right to instituting blood pressure medications, they're going to not talk to people about the real problem, which is getting healthier, right? And so cutting back on certain foods, exercising more, and I think lifestyle recommendations are going to go by the wayside, which they already are starting to go by, and people are going to be too trigger happy and just jump right to medications.
Yeah, very well said. Absolutely. And we'll talk about some specific concerns. So how often do we see, Dr. Ben, I know you're in the world of primary care, I'm in the world of hospital medicine, older people who it's very obvious when we speak to them, these medicines have piled up over the years. So as anybody gets older, a lot of people, their blood pressure will start to naturally drop down with age. Maybe there's loss of muscle mass. Let's think about the most obvious one, people feeling weak because they're running at these low blood pressures and on 3 or 4 medications. Maybe their systolic number, top number is in the low 100s. What sort of things do you see in primary care, Dr. Ben?
Oh, we see a lot of that. We'll see metoprolol or the beta blockers specifically will cause just an awful generalized fatigue. We will see, the problem is we have primary care visits at scheduled times, throughout the year. And what happens is sometimes a fair amount of time's gone by before I've seen them. By the time I see them again, they may not realize that their blood pressure's been low for a while. And some of these events they're having with dizziness and stuff like that is because of the blood pressure dropping, and it's been too aggressive. So I'm very quick to start pulling these things off if I think, that's happening. We see it can cause a lot of electrolyte abnormalities. Some of these are diuretics and they can cause problems with your sodium, and we can have people get confused because of that. They can get dehydrated because of these meds. So, a fair amount of problems you can see with
that would be medicine like hydrochlorothiazide.
That's right.
Or bendrofluozide if you're in the UK, one of my least favorite medications there. Causes lots of problems, low potassium. But yeah, this issue of weakness, I cannot tell you. It happens to me every day I'm in the hospital. I'm taking a history and there'll be an older person, often, let's say above the age of 80, but it could often happen much younger. And I'll be taking their history and I'll think, hold on, you're on 3 or 4 medications. You've been getting sicker. You wound up in hospital and it's obvious you've been feeling unwell for a long time and your blood pressures are running low in the hospital. Fair enough, you are unwell. But when I go through the history, it's clear that they are being overtreated and these medicines are piled on over the years.
I agree. I mean, I call it the polypharmacy spiral, and where patients are just put on one medication after the other. And all the time when I see patients in the office, the first thing that I do is really check on the timing of medication. You'd be surprised. A lot of people are told, especially when they leave the hospital, to take all their medications in the morning. So now you're having, a person who's having 3 or 4 different medications all at once. Their blood pressure is going to bottom out during the day. And what's going to happen at night is that some of them are going to wear off and their blood pressure is going to be elevated again. And it just creates this whole paradigm of polypharmacy and side effects, which just takes you down this whole rabbit hole of just different doctors, more dependency, more visits, medications to offset other medications. And so it's just a horrible way of practicing medicine, I think.
It reminds me of this story. I've told this before, but we had a patient in the hospital who he was on, if he went through his medications, he was maxed out on almost every single class of blood pressure medications you can imagine. So he's maxed out on everything, the highest dose you can imagine, and they cannot get him under control. His blood pressure is still through the roof. And so finally he's in the hospital. This is his first day, and the nurse sits with him and makes sure he takes every pill that he's scheduled to take. And guess what happens? Crashes, has to go to the intensive care unit, has to, get resuscitated because his blood pressure went so low. Turns out he'd never been taking any of it and nobody'd ever asked, right? So he kept going to his primary care doctor. It kept being elevated. So they put him on a new pill. They increased his dose. They kept going up. Nobody'd ever asked him if he was actually taking the medication. So this is the kind of thing that can happen. Now that's an extreme example, but the point is that's that idea of, oh, your blood pressure's high, here's a med. Oh, your blood pressure's high, here's a med. And that's why I get scared about the guidelines, because it can push that kind of behavior where, hey, we got to get it down. We got to get it down. And you can, there are problems with lowering blood pressure too much.
There are, yeah. And my understanding from the guidelines, which again, we'll put a link down below so you can look at the tables that they have, that now 130 to 140 is classed as stage 1 hypertension. In many parts of the world, that would be considered way too aggressive. But undoubtedly now there is a school of thought, and again, everybody's an individual, that if somebody has a blood pressure of 132, then that might be okay for them. But now this will be classed as hypertension. medications pile up. I can tell you a story as well about a very close relative of mine, which I've shared before earlier this year. He was having breakfast, had just made breakfast actually, and came over really, really dizzy and said he wasn't feeling good. And I was there and we sat him down, a blood pressure machine there. His top number systolic was in their 80s, low 80s. So we lay him down, hydrated him. Thankfully, he was okay. We took him to his local doctor later, but obviously I was managing everything in the meantime, but we got the blood pressure up. But he was on 3 blood pressure pills, and it was clear when I went over the history that he was running at this low blood pressure, been complaining of feeling weak in the morning. Multiply this by millions. I believe it's a scandal of epic proportions. I've talked before about how we also overtreat blood pressure in the hospital, which is a whole different topic. But how about falling? How often do we see people above a certain age fall as well because of this issue? Because that's the next logical thing. You're weak, you're dizzy, you fall. And I know, Dr. Peter, how big you are on this. A fall can ruin somebody's life. I mean, we see people who are the model of independence, and it's heartbreaking. They are doing really well. They fall, come into hospital, end up with 1 or 2 complications, rehab. Their life is never the same again, and they may be in a nursing home. It's terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think falls is what we always worry about in any of our loved ones or family members, and it's such a high risk of over-treating patients. That's really what I worry about the most. The common final pathway of over-medication actually is falls, and it's probably the most common thing, especially as you get older. I have an orthopedic friend I had a really good discussion with. That was kind of an eye-opener who we talked about people who came in with a fall and who would break their hip and the outcome after that. And we determined after comparing numbers that your outcomes after breaking a hip of surviving and quality of life are actually worse than coming in with a major heart attack.
Really?
All right. And so we don't really realize that, but if you put it into context, it's actually quite scary and really just not talked about, of the whole paradigm of just all these medications being loaded on one after the other. And we're not talking about anti-medication here. It's just the context of the patient. Nowhere really in the guidelines is it really heavily aiming on age groups. We know that as you get older, the volume of distribution of medications gets smaller, side effect profiles get higher, and people just aren't aware of that or really just don't take that into account.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to interrupt that awesome discussion for a moment to tell you about our expanding natural health and well-being store. We are very proud of our expanding store. We have natural immune inflammation support, bone support, memory support, heart support, sleep support, and our newly released premium organic lion's mane and organic chai mix. We've got some great reviews so far. Check in the links down below. ohiwellness.com if you're in the USA, North America, ohiwellness.co if you're in the UK, Europe. Also keep an eye out for our upcoming food and beverage products, including protein-thin snacks. All right, back to the discussion. Completely agree. Yes, absolutely. And the statistics, by the way, if you want to look after somebody has a hip fracture, comes into hospital, the 1-year survival overall is absolutely abysmal once that happens, when you add up that people have that and how often do they get another complications, and they might be in their 80s by then, just terrible. So you want to avoid a fall. How about something else which seems very logical to us, but doesn't seem so logical to members of the medical establishment that keep pushing their pharma products? If somebody is running at a low blood pressure, particularly above a certain age, 65, they're not getting enough blood to the brain. Will there not be an obvious link to cognitive decline and dementia, Dr. Ben? We know this, but a lot of people who lead the world of medicine don't know this.
Well, there have been studies that showed that overly aggressive blood pressure management and sugar management in the elderly can cause a significant amount of downstream effects that are negative. Severely high blood pressure has been linked to that, but so is severely low. So continuously low blood pressures can contribute to that condition as well. So, it's the same thing we constantly say in the world of medicine. It's lower it as much as possible, but never think about what happens if it gets too low. That is really the common theme we just keep seeing over and over again.
And that's a really good point. So we've done other podcasts on cholesterol and the benefits of cholesterol, what happens when it gets too low. Really in the guidelines, it's really not talking about what happens. Like, you do need blood pressure. As you said before, Ben, in the past, that, God has put stuff in our body for a reason. Blood pressure is important. And we never really talk about what are the dangers of low blood pressure. It's nowhere in the guidelines. It's just push medications. It's really becoming not science. It's more sales.
Yeah, completely agree. And when it comes to the sales of pharmaceutical products, which are rocketing, I mean, these are not benign medications in that they do have side effects. We're not talking about anything natural here. We're talking about synthetic products which really work on receptors in the heart and will forcibly lower somebody's blood pressure or force of contraction of the heart. And we're not saying they don't have any role. By contrast, high blood pressure is dangerous. We see people have strokes. It's that sort of middle ground where this hyper aggressive nature that we see repeated time and time again, it's like they never learned their lesson during the pandemic. Go all in, like all guns blazing, like complete cowboys. Maybe that's an insult to cowboys, but you know what I mean. Jump on the bandwagon, go all in. We see this with cholesterol, and then we see the consequences of it. And I don't doubt that tens of millions of people are being overtreated for blood pressure unnecessarily, and everybody's blood pressure is very unique. We'll include a link down below to one of our separate videos where we talk about this in more detail. But I do want to talk about the motivations here, because I so wish that the medical profession would wake up that when these recommendations come, they're not coming from anywhere. These organizations do receive a lot of funds and sponsorships from makers of these pills. You cannot neglect that from the equation. I'm not saying every doctor in that society is thinking that way, but there are other agendas here which are very obvious.
Well, it's just, to have the guidelines continue to go in a way that is extremely profitable for pharmaceutical companies is a heck of a coincidence. I mean, it's interesting. Again, there is mention of, not all patients are the same. Make sure you talk to your patient. But again, if you put guidelines that everyone is supposed to follow in, you know where it's going to lead. There's going to be more medications pushed. And it's not giving consideration to the damage done by the side effects of these medications. It's not giving consideration done to what happens if your blood pressure is too low and there are too many patients that end up having low blood pressure. So, I don't think those risks and benefits are appropriately weighed. And I do think the guidelines often tend, if not always tend, to go in the direction of more prescribing instead of less.
Yep, that's very, very true. Yeah. And I like your statement about the reality of the human body, and God made the human body in a certain way, and certain changes take place over time. So what tends to happen is, as anybody gets older, this happens more after the age of 65. A lot of the arteries, which you can speak more as our cardiologist, right? The great arteries around the heart, aorta, calcify. And that is because it is trying to maintain a certain pressure going to the tissues of the body. Then at the more extremes of age, so usually over the age of 80, that's when the drop can occur. So that's what I tend to find. Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, we know that hardening the arteries is kind of the term that a lot of people use, but you have stiffening of the walls of the artery. And so the ability of the arteries to expand and dilate and constrict to control blood pressure goes down as you get older. And that's why we see blood pressure raising with age. That stiffening of the arteries also stops our body to be able to smoothly control blood pressure. So we can take a medication and we can be a little bit elevated, and then we can totally plummet our blood pressure. And that is called labile hypertension or labile blood pressure, which can be very dangerous. It can lead to other things like orthostatic hypotension, which is positional changes in your blood pressure. I can't tell you how many patients of mine that I've seen, even as new patients, that have gone out of bed at night to go to the bathroom, and halfway to the bathroom, they fall on the ground.
It happens all the time.
And so it's really striking.
It is striking. And I don't doubt that this is going to get worse, because the medical establishment in the United States is intent on this hyper aggressive management and being all in. And it just gets back again to that one size fits all approach, which we saw during the pandemic. We know that all of you watching see this as well. By the way, please feel free to comment down below your stories, which are based on your blood pressure experiences, because everybody who has been through this or had a loved one go through it will have their own thoughts. I so many times I'm rounding in the hospital, and people with no medical background at all will say to me, "Mum does better at this blood pressure," or "I know this blood pressure is not right for me." And please share your stories down below, because the more people talk about this, eventually doctors and the medical profession are going to have to listen and understand that you cannot have these one-size-fits-all rules. Human beings are not airplanes. We're not pieces of machinery. Healthcare should not be an assembly line as much as the modern day paradigm is to make it that way. Everybody is so unique. You're so special, and you know what your blood pressure should be, or at least many people know. And that's what doctors should understand as well. Let's talk about the reason why people get high blood pressure, because the guidelines, which we've included the link down below, will tell you these numbers, but also they focus on diet, which is a huge area of interest of ours as doctors who take a keen interest in metabolic health. But the Society of Cardiologists is absolutely stuns me. No offense, Dr. Peter, because you are one of the best cardiologists in the world. Easily, we know that. And I wish that more cardiologists had your line of thinking of diet is absolutely key, because most people, especially, and this is going back below the age of 50, who get high blood pressure now have insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction. That can flip a little bit as people get older and their arteries and their heart changes. But if you look at the guidelines, the Society of Cardiologists, who are supposed to know these things, they are so focused on salt and saturated fat. They have made not one recommendation about people cutting back on carbs and sugars, which is actually causing the insulin resistance, because excess sugars get converted into fatty acids via a process known as de novo lipogenesis. Then insulin resistance occurs and people's blood pressure shoots up. But Dr. Peter, speak to us about why, and I know you're going to change this in the world of cardiology. Why are cardiologists so focused on salt and saturated fat? Which, of course, if you have too much of it, it's bad. But can they not see what is causing insulin resistance?
I think it's come back to what you said, Ben, before, is that, when guidelines get set, doctors are kind of pushed to, make these numbers. And I don't think that doctors have just been educated enough. And going through medical school and training, they're not really even taught about really the dangers of inflammation, right? As heart disease as an inflammatory process, which necessarily isn't caused by bad cholesterol. It's actually caused by highly refined carbs, inflammatory foods, seed oils that are highly processed. And it's amazing in how little that is talked about. But I think the reason that doctors don't talk about it is because a lot of them just aren't educated, because it's not been the mainstream way of thinking and teaching to medical students as they go through it. Hopefully there will be that change, because it's actually like such an important process.
Yeah. No, I think there will be. I got to tell you, I saw a patient a while ago, and I remember he said to me, because we were talking about it and we were talking about his diet, and he said, well, I talked to a cardiologist and he said, your diet isn't that important. What's important is being on the right medications and at the right doses. And I couldn't believe it. I just said,
Had palpitations.
yeah,
there.
I know.
My blood pressure's just gone up
I
now.
couldn't
I need a
believe
pill.
it. I couldn't believe it. But then I was very reassured when I saw another patient come in who's a young fella, and he basically said, I never believed you are what you eat until recently. And he said, I'm beginning to see that what I eat affects me mentally and physically so much. So it's funny, this guy figured it out himself, whereas the other guy was being fed inappropriate information from a doctor, which was very unfortunate. So there's a lot of education that has to occur on all fronts, and diet is vital. Of course it's vital. We can't eat terrible foods, and it's not talked about enough. And I think thinking that we can solve a lot of these problems just with medications is the error in thinking. It's like if you have a flood and you're talking the entire time about which bucket might be the best to bail it out and never asking why you have a flood. And that's, I think, what's happening. That's why we're having the entire population get sicker as we have stricter guidelines and are pushing more and more creative medications.
That's right. And don't underestimate the ability of history to repeat itself, because if we go back to the 60s, doctors used to smoke on ward rounds. Some of you may remember those days. Can you imagine that? And doctors, I have relatives now who tell me they remember going to the doctor's office and the doctor would be smoking in the room. Total ignorance of something which was obviously bad for you. And then things just got so bad and suddenly everything fell off a cliff. And that's often how things happen. But I'm shocked. I mean, I work in some of the better hospitals now, which I have to say have some better cardiologists, but over the years, I've worked up and down the East Coast of the US, I've worked in the UK, and the amount of times I have seen a cardiologist enter the room and somebody has a blood pressure issue and they'll walk straight past their pile of muffins, of bread, maybe their relative has brought in chocolates. They'll talk to the patient, having seen that plate of annihilation right by the bedside, and they will come back to their computer or even in the days of written charts and they'll say, told patient to restrict salt intake. I mean, it just makes you wonder. I mean, doctors are humans and you have these huge blind spots right there. And they do it because that's the way they've always done it. And then everything reaches a certain level. And then, like with smoking, suddenly, stop smoking, stop smoking. They went from smoking on ward rounds to telling everybody the number one thing you must do is stop smoking. It's a funny quirk of human nature, how history works. Yeah, herd mentality. Yeah,
and I think that, and we're seeing it now, and I hopefully, and I have hope that there is a change. I do see, at least with patients, a lot of patients are coming to me wanting to know more about their diet. They're actually asking, is there anything else that I can do besides medication? Which I love hearing because I've never heard that in the past few years. There's a wave of great new motivated people that really want to like take care of their health and have that personal responsibility, because it's really a collaboration between your doctor and your patient to really just make sure that, you control the things you can control, and, things you can't, then, there are, certain aspects of medicine that are great for that.
Exactly. Very well said. Yeah. More people are waking up, and we know, and that's why you're here as well, because you really care for your health. You care for your family's health, and you sense that something is very, very wrong with the way things are working. So congratulations for being here. And we hope that our content here really makes you think. Of course, this isn't direct medical advice. There are some doctors out there, some medical professionals who will watch a show like this and they will get very angry because they are so close-minded. They are not used to thinking outside the box. They don't want open debate. They want everything to be one way. And when they hear something a bit different or a concern, they don't respond with curiosity, which is the true way of science. They respond with anger. And we saw that during the pandemic. And doctors like us are making this type of content to fight that, because we believe that the way forward is to understand the reality of the world, know that there are enormous conflicts of interest, and ultimately never forget that this is about you and your health. And you're the ones who are in charge. So let's finish with closing statements about our concerns for this aggressive blood pressure management, which appears to be getting worse every year. Dr. Ben.
Yeah. So always be careful with new guidelines. I think we always are to know where they came from, understand what they're telling you to do, and always ask your doctor and question your doctor if they're trying to adhere too aggressively toward some of these guidelines, or if they're pushing medications on you that don't make sense. Be careful when you're at home. If you start noticing things after starting a new medication that you didn't have before, it very well could be the medication. A lot of side effects, it could be one of them. So be careful, protect yourself, and stay well.
Good point, Ben. Take control of your health. Don't be dependent on your doctor. I think that is the best thing that I can give advice to, is there's certain things that you control them. A lot of times by doing so, you may not need to see a doctor.
Yeah, very well said. That's what we want for you. And my closing statement is, you know your own body, and I don't think you should ever underestimate the power of your gut instinct. If you or a loved one has an experience where you don't feel good, you know a medication has been started, you sense that something is wrong, often you will know, or your loved one will know, that over-medication is involved. Be skeptical of everything nowadays, sadly. Get second opinions. Listen to a wide variety of opinions. Maybe people have a different opinion to us. Listen to that and then make your own mind. And if people throw a study in front of you and say, well, this study says that a blood pressure below 120 is great for people 60 to 70, ask questions. Say, what kind of people were studied? I know this is difficult if you don't have a medical background or science background, but this is how they run rings around you, because they exclude a lot of important groups in studies. You look at who funded the study and you realize right away what's going on. You look at the people who are pushing a particular study result, and it's basic common sense. You can't change medical practice based on one study, which goes contrary to a lot of common sense. So that would be my final bit of advice. We thank you for watching. Your success is our success. We want the best possible health for you. We want you to live the healthiest life, ideally away from prescriptions if possible, which are our last resort. We want you to not get sucked into the medical industrial complex. Keep going, everyone. We are willing you on. Check in the links down below again for our separate unique channel and our natural health and wellbeing store, ohiwellness.com. If you're in the USA, North America, ohiwellness.co. If you're in the UK, Europe, we will speak again in the next show.